All right, so in this video, we're going to talk about Cloudflare Workers. Now, this is the first of a series of videos that I want to do, which we build on top of the foundation that we learned today to build a server using Cloudflare Workers. Now, if you don't know what workers are or what Cloudflare is, we're going to walk through the definitions and some concepts from high level. We're going to jump into the code and actually spin up a worker so we can see end to end how we deal with this or what it is. And then in future videos, we're going to introduce frameworks to build a server. We're going to bring in databases and storage to this worker to make it a full-blown backend just by using Cloudflare Workers. So let's dive right into this. If you have heard Cloudflare, probably you have heard it as a CDN where you either host your static assets like images, JavaScript file and CSS, or you have used it as a protection against DDoS attacks or as a firewall. But Cloudflare is actually more than that. It's a global network of servers now, so it offers compute as well as the CDN or static host. It has domain registration. I've recently learned about this, and I'm in the process of transferring some of my domains into Cloudflare. You have Cloudflare Pages, which is to deploy front-end sites, so you can deploy an Next.js app, a Svelte app, or an Astro app completely to Cloudflare Pages. Cloudflare Workers, which is the serverless function service that Cloudflare provides, or the edge functions, as you might know. In fact, if you're deploying your Next.js applications to Vercel, your middleware function turns into a Cloudflare Worker, which is it runs on the edge or it uses the edge runtime. We're going to learn about the intricacies of the edge runtime and what it is and how it differentiates Cloud Workers with other serverless function providers that there's out there. It also has storage resources like databases, media. Recently, I have seen vector databases for your AI applications and whatnot. And obviously, application security. You probably have known this against DDoS attacks or distributed denial of service protection firewalls. You can have Cloudflare to sit in between your origin server and the requests coming into your site to protect against this. Also for CDN and load balancing that you might be familiar with. Now, in this video, we're going to talk about serverless computing and serverless functions or the Cloudflare Workers. So let's start by understanding what do we mean by serverless computing. Now, serverless computing refers to cloud computing model where providers like Cloudflare manage servers on behalf of users. So instead of you having to manage your own server, you just rent this server or somebody else manages the server for you, and then you're using this compute from them. That's the kind of computing model. Cloud computing is defined as hosting computing resources such as virtual machines, storage, databases, and network services on a third-party server. Now, providers like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and Cloudflare, they all have this cloud computing as a service. Now, Workers specifically is a serverless computing provider that allows you to build serverless applications or augment existing ones by writing code that's deployed instantly across the globe. So it gives you a function that you can execute anytime that you want to run a logic. It's serverless because you're not maintaining a server. Another company is running this compute or this service and gives you this service. And that's why it's called serverless, but it is actually running on a server. It's that you're not managing it. And you probably have used this before. We have serverless functions in Next.js if you've been using it for your route handlers, for your page, server components, and whatnot. So you probably know what this is. Now we want to dive to the specifics of Cloudflare Workers, which is edge functions or serverless functions, but it's different from the other providers in its execution model and architecture. As far as the runtime, the Workers runtime is designed to be JavaScript standards compliant with web interoperable. It uses the V8 engine, which is the same engine used by Node.js and Chromium, which powers Google Chrome, the browser. So it's interoperable, meaning that you can run it in any environment. It's supporting all the web standards for JavaScript. So If you're familiar with Node Next.js middleware, again, in the Edge runtime, there was this limitation that you could only run web standard API. So some of the APIs may not be supported, but the web standard APIs are supported on the Workers runtime. Now, as far as the execution, usually serverless functions or the traditional providers spin up a container or a virtual machine anytime that a request comes in for your function. Now, that container, to spawn up that container or the virtual machine, or to start the node process, usually takes some time, which is called the cold start. And that's usually the downside of using serverless functions, because there is no consistent server running responding to your requests. Every time a request comes in, there is a price or a cost or a time that you have to pay for this machine to start and then to respond to your requests. However, in Workers, they run on it. Every worker runs within its own isolate. Now, isolate architecture is what makes Workers efficient. You can think of isolates like a sandbox for your functions. It's a lightweight context that provides the code, the environment variables, and the secrets that it needs to run. And it runs alongside other isolates on an already spun up virtual machine or a container. They have their own memory, so the memory of the isolate, each isolate is completely separate and isolated, so the code is protected from other codes running on the runtime. They're designed to start very quickly because they're lightweight. And instead of creating a virtual machine for each function, an isolate is created within an existing environment. So a virtual machine is running already, or a server is running already, and an isolate is just created on an existing running server or environment. And this eliminates the cold start of virtual machine model. Now, unlike other serverless providers which use containerized processes, each running an instance of the language runtime. So let's say you have a process that's running a JavaScript runtime. For Workers, you've already paid the overhead of starting up a runtime for JavaScript, and then at the start of the container, so once the containers are started, you've already paid for the cost of starting up this runtime. And then once the isolates are created, they basically have close to zero cold start, and they run about 100 times faster than a node process on a container or a virtual machine. So it's a serverless function in that it's a cloud computing, you're not managing your own servers, but because of the architecture that it has, it makes it, or it enables it to run way faster than your traditional serverless functions, which makes it very interesting. Now, to set one up, you can use Cloudflare dashboard, or you can use the CLI tool. In dashboard, we're going to go through the dashboard. We're going to spin up a worker and test it out. And then we're going to go to the code and actually create one using the CLI. So let's start from the dashboard. If you have a Cloudflare account, if you don't have it, just go ahead and sign up. You could sign up for free. And a lot of stuff that you can use already from Cloudflare, different services, they come with a pretty generous free tier, so you don't even have to pay. I don't remember when I opened up my account if I needed to put in a credit card or not. I don't remember that part because I created my Cloudflare account some time ago. But the services that I'm using now is free. All right, so under the workers and pages, you can see an overview of your current workers and pages. You can hit create to create a new worker. So there's two tabs, workers and pages. From the same place, you can create a new pages application as well to host front-end sites. In this video, we're going to do workers, but in the follow-up videos that I'm having in mind to have for this series, we're going to talk about pages as well. So you can hit create worker and give it a name if you want, or just stick with the one that comes in here, and you hit deploy underneath there, just underneath my image. And this is going to go ahead and spin up your application. This is your endpoint, so it's now live. It's responding the same text that we saw in the fetch handler, which we can then also go back, continue to the project, and edit beyond that. So you can hit edit code. I did that a bit fast, so edit code up top here. It takes you to the playground or a code editor that you can code or update this fetch handler. So basically from your worker, you're exporting a default object that has a fetch handler that responds to incoming requests. So if I change this now to, let's say, JSON.stringify, and let's pass in an object with a message property that says hello workers. And if I run this here on the right hand side, now I see the message before I deploy these changes. If I'm happy with the changes, I can go ahead and deploy, and this becomes live. And now if I visit that endpoint, which is live, it is going to give me that JSON object. Okay, so that's how you create a worker, update the code, and if you need to talk to different services, as I mentioned, you can connect to your database or talk to OpenAI for AI applications. You can come in here under the settings and add your variables and secrets. We're going to talk about variables and secrets at the end of the video and how they're different, but basically you come in here, you can have a text or a JSON variable or a secret, and this, the value that you provide here would be available to your fetch handler via this env parameter, so you can access your environment variables, whether you're using them for, configuration, or you're using secrets like API tokens to connect your backend services or other third-party services. Now, another thing I want to show before we move on to the backend and actually use the CLI tool to create a worker is if we go to the workers and pages and go to create one, if you scroll down, there are some templates here. So there are some interesting templates that you can, get some inspiration from or pick as your starting point. Things like A/B testing, image classification is a worker that's connected to AI models running. We have an integration between your worker and Neon database. Neon is a serverless Postgres. We have talked about it on the channel. I will link this video in the description and in the card as well for integrating Neon into your application. It's amazing. Ever since I was introduced to Neon, I've never gone back. I'm only using Neon as my, anytime that I need Postgres, I'm using Neon. Other than that, I'm using MongoDB. So yeah, there are some templates here, some starters you could just go through. We're going to have videos about this as well. Another thing I want to mention on Cloudflare is that there's this thing called Workers AI, where it's your serverless functions that are specifically AI related, so they talk to your AI endpoints. You can create AI gateways that sit in between your AI apps or AI endpoints and your requests. You can rate limit and whatnot. There's also a vector database called Vectorize if you are into AI apps. I think Cloudflare is pretty powerful in the array of different services that it provides, and it seems like they're just keep adding it, because before, years ago when I used Cloudflare, I used it for the CDN and also as a layer of protection, as a proxy server. But now every time I see new services coming up, new services are added, and AI is one of those things that was added here. All right, so let's go back to our note here. The second way to create a worker is through the CLI. This is a command line interface tool by Cloudflare that allows you to create and deploy your project. So C3 is called, this is a Cloudflare CLI tool. It is a command line tool that helps you create new applications, and Wrangler, which is going to help you build and deploy. When you install C3 or a new Cloudflare project, this is going to automatically install the latest version of Wrangler, so you don't need to install it again for you. Now, a quick note here that Cloudflare recommends that pick one or the other. So if you're using the dashboard to create your worker, use the dashboard, define your variables there. If you're using the CLI tool, do everything in the CLI tool. And the reason for that is, like for things like your environment variables or your project configuration, if you're using your CLI tool, wrangler.toml is where you would define all of this config, which we're going to look at in a second. And if you're using the dashboard, you don't have the wrangler.toml. Instead, you have the dashboard where you can just define different project settings or variables and secrets and whatnot. So it's best if we pick one source of truth for our application. All right, so let's create our first worker using the Cloudflare CLI tool, or the C3. So I'm going to copy this, or we're going to type it pm create Cloudflare at latest, and let's call this first worker. So this is going to take you through a couple of steps and questions and ask you what exactly you wanted to create. So what is it? It's a hello world example. We can click on this. We want to create a hello world worker TypeScript. This is going to install our dependencies and ask whether or not we wanted to deploy this worker, and that's done. At this point, if you're not logged into Cloudflare, it might redirect you back to the Cloudflare web browsers for you to log in and then come back here. I'm already logged in, so it passed that. So do you want to use Git for version control? Yes. Do you want to deploy? Yes. Let's see this in action as well. All right, so our link is live. As you can see down here in the terminal, I have the hello world here. Back to the terminal, and we have everything all set up and done. Coming back here, let's actually cd into first worker. Let's open up this in the VS Code. Now there's two things mainly that you need to worry about here. One is in index.ts and the source. This is the same exact thing that we saw on the dashboard, which is the entry point of your project, which is a default export with a fetch handler that responds to incoming requests, again returning a hello world. And the second thing you need to worry about here, because you're using the CLI tool, is the wrangler.toml. This is where you would define different settings. You can bind your worker to different databases, services from worker, or define environment variables, as you can see here. Let me just make this a bit bigger. So as you can see, this is how I would create an environment variable in Wrangler, and once I deploy and push this to Cloudflare, it's going to pick up on this. It's going to read the TOML file and pick up on these environment variables and set them inside of my deployed version as well. We're going to talk a little bit more in details about the variables, so bear with me for a second. Right now, we don't need this environment variables. We have successfully spun up our worker locally. We can save this, go out of this. And now if I go back to the terminal, well, I can run it locally by running npm run dev. This is using Wrangler. Again, this is installed automatically. .dev for local development. You can open it up at localhost 8787 or just push the B button. It opens up the browser and you see the same command here. If I go back and update our response over here to say, let's just send in a JSON.stringify with a message, and then let's say hello from dev. I don't know what this was. This is at the end of it. Do we need another? Yeah, there you go. So if I go back, now I hit this endpoint again, I get my JSON back. Now you can go back. We could do more things. This is just a fetch handler. You have access to the request. So I can say const path name a new URL. So I get the request object. I access the URL. I create a new URL. I access the path name. And let's say I want to say if the path is dev, I want to return this hello from dev. Otherwise, I want to say, I don't know, hello from prod or hello from or hello world, whatever, doesn't matter. The point is you can just literally do, so here, hello world, and now I have created a path to go to dev, and now this is saying hello dev. You can also access the request method if I can type request, just like any other handler or middleware. Now, if you're using this one handler for defining and designing all the endpoints and all the methods, it can get cumbersome. So if it is something simple, maybe you can spin up an API and use it like this. And I have. Right now I have a process running, or I designed an endpoint that just does some logic. I was designing a different app. I couldn't run some code inside of it, and instead of having to use other tools to glue the services together, I have just put all of the logic inside an endpoint in a worker, and I'm just calling that API endpoint and get the result back really easily. But what's interesting is in the next video that we're going to do, I'm going to introduce Hano. Hano is a server framework, just like Express for Node.js, but Hano was designed by the Cloudflare team actually for the workers. So it sits very nicely on top of the workers, and it makes it super easy for you to now create a full-blown server with different paths, methods, and middlewares, just like you would do in Express. But now all of that it's sitting on the workers, all of that it's running serverless, all of that it's running on the isolate, the edge runtime, which is pretty fast. So it's very exciting what you can do with Hano. Now you can use Hano outside of workers too. Now it has grown to be even a standalone framework that you can use. It's pretty popular, but the origin of Hano was from the workers. We're going to talk about that in future videos for sure. Now, anytime that you're done with your updates, you're going to hit X to shut down the local development. You can run pm run deploy. This is going to use, again, the Wrangler package or the CLI tool to deploy our application or deploy our changes to that. And now we're live. If I go to that endpoint, is it? No, it's not showing what we define. Oh, yes. Hello from dev and hello world. So we have the hello world from the index. And then if you go to /dev, it says hello from dev. All right, so our changes are now deployed. Now, if I go back to the Cloudflare worker and go to the overview, I can see this first worker. This is what we created from the CLI, and this one was what we created from the dashboard. All right, so that's how you can create your worker using the dashboard. Now, let's talk about environment variables really quickly and the secrets and how they're different. Okay, so environment variables allow you to attach strings or JSON values to your worker. Now, think of them as a way of storing config for your project. They're not meant to store secrets or passwords or any sensitive information, and they're not encrypted. Okay, there's two ways that you can add environment variables. One is via the Wrangler. There's actually three ways. I said two ways, and I've written two ways, but there's three ways here. So via the Wrangler, you can have the wrangler.toml if you are using a local. If you're using the CLI tool, you can just come in here and just as I show, define your variables here, right? That's one. The second way is adding a .dev.vars. So on the source of your application, you can add .dev.vars. This is just like your .env or .env.local in your Next.js apps. You would just use the same key value pairs there. And this overrides anything you have in the TOML file. And this is good for local development. This is good for stuff you don't want to push to prod. It's just locally staying there, and you don't want it to even include it in your Git or commit it to your Git or push it or deploy it to your project. It's just for your local development. You can have, let's say, development keys and secrets, and then production keys and secrets, and these two can be different. So if that's the case, you can have the dev.vars inside of your local. Now, again, from your dashboard, you can also add in your environment variables, and I've already shown this. So if I go to my first worker under the settings, I can come to variables and secrets, and here I can hit add, define if it's a JSON or a text, give it a name and then the value, and then deploy, which is going to take that value and deploy a new version of your worker that has access to that value. Now, let's also talk about secrets. Now, secrets are good for storing things like API keys, tokens, passwords, or sensitive information. They are encrypted text. And that's how they're different from environment variables. There's two ways to add them to your local development. You can use the .dev.wars. For your deployed workers, you can either use the Wrangler to go wrangler.secret.put. So using the CLI tool, you're going to push and put a new secret or delete your secrets. So that's through the CLI. If you are hoping to add a secret or delete a secret. And the second way is via the dashboard. Now, just like how I show here for variables, you can, on this dropdown, select secret, and this is going to be encrypted, variable name value, and then once you do this, it will be encrypted. You can never see the value again here in the dashboard. You can only access it via the CLI Wrangler tool. Now, you might think, what's the difference between the environment variables and secrets? Well, to your worker, they're not different. It's just that environment variables are not encrypted, but secrets are. And they're not visible after you define them. If you have sensitive data, including passwords, API tokens, and whatnot, you should always encrypt them. You should always store them as a secret, not as an environment variable. Now, this might trick you because in Next.js, we're used to just have this .env, and we think of the .env as something that's your environment variable, that's your secret. You may be treating it as a secret, and you see environment variable here. You think by default that it's secret, but it is not. There's two different environment variables. One is encrypted, one is not. The encrypted one is called a secret, which you can use to store sensitive information. This other one is used to store values, text, and JSON for your project config. Now, that was workers from a nutshell. What they are, how they're different with your traditional serverless functions. I think they're powerful. I've recently started using API endpoints and servers and workers inside so many different apps. They're so easy to spin up, so easy to deploy, so easy to use, and they're super fast. So it's for free. I haven't checked the pricing, to be honest with you, to know at what point it's going to be turned into a paid. But a lot of Cloudflare services are very cheap compared to other providers out there. For example, images or media storage that I've seen on Cloudflare now, it's just not even closely comparable. It's just a way less. It's way less expensive, I want to say, or it's cheaper than other comparable providers out there. We're going to build on top of this series, as I mentioned in the beginning. We're going to build a server using workers. We're going to add databases to it, storage media maybe to it. Maybe we also cover some AI features, the AI gateway, just using the Cloudflare suite of services and products. If you have any questions, like always, hit me up in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.